Hi everyone, and welcome to the 2017 CodeTalk series. This series is co-sponsored by ODTUG and IOUG and provided by Oracle Developer Advocates. Today's webinar is Oracle Database Multilingual Engine, JavaScript in the Database, and will be presented by Dan McGhan and Matthias Brantner, both of Oracle Corporation. Any questions that you have during the webinar, please type them into the questions box and they will be addressed during the Q&A period. This presentation will be recorded and will be available to everyone on the CodeTalk page of the ODTUG website. So welcome Dan and Matthias, and thank you both for being here today.
Hello.
Hi Karen. Hi everybody. Hi Dan.
Thanks for joining us today.
Sure.
So, tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Okay. So I'm a researcher at Oracle Labs at HQ in Redwood City. At Labs, the mission of Labs is to identify, explore, and transfer new technologies that have the potential to grow Oracle's business. And in Labs, I'm working in a group that does research at the crossroad between programming languages, compilers, and database technologies. And in that area, we are developing. One of the projects that I'm involved in is an experimental extension to the Oracle database called Multilingual Engine. And its goal is to allow running any modern programming language, for example JavaScript, which is what we're going to talk about today, inside the database management system.
Very cool. And so you're targeting JavaScript right now, but what other languages do you have in mind for this engine?
Well, we are looking at all the major popular ones. If you look at Stack Overflow, the obvious next choice for us to look into is Python, which kind of has a different angle than JavaScript, a more analytical approach. But we'll also have Java or Go on the radar. But JavaScript and Python are the one that we're leading with.
Gotcha. Very cool. So basically the ability to run modern programming languages within the database, but there may be some folks here that have been using Oracle for a while and quite comfortable perhaps with PL SQL. So what's the deal here? You know, why PL SQL over, or why MLE, JavaScript, or any of these other languages over PL SQL?
That's an excellent question. I mean, the Oracle database is an extremely robust, feature-rich, and secure platform that allows users to do all kind of data processing, user-defined data processing, specifically store procedure and user-defined functions in PL SQL. And PL SQL is an excellent choice if you want to do SQL, right? It's a superset. It embraces SQL, and it's extremely efficient and has been tuned over the years. Now, the thing is that developers still sometimes feel uncomfortable in changing languages, and they just want to use the programming language of their choice, right? They might be using a programming language in the front end, JavaScript in the mid-tier, Python, JavaScript in Node.js. And the thing with those modern programming languages is that they typically come with a pretty large community that provides a huge number of software packages. And so I think everybody believes me if I say that there are many more people that know JavaScript today that there are people that know PL SQL. And so we believe that we should just be able to cater to all those developers as well. And we don't want to use JavaScript over PL SQL or PL SQL over JavaScript. We just want to give developers a choice.
That makes a lot of sense. Cool. So I understand you have some demos to show us today?
Yeah. I'd like to show you something. So just to set the context, this is the Oracle Database Multilingual Engine is an experimental feature. You can download it right now on the Oracle Technology Network as a virtual box or as a Docker container, and I'm using the Docker container for the demo today. So what I have here, what you see on my screen, is an end-to-end, what people call end-to-end JavaScript application. The front end is written in Angular, using AngularJS. The mid-tier is running Node.js. And it really just is a very, very simple, naive application that shows all the email addresses that are stored in a table in our database, right? So you can see it's extremely responsive. But what you also see is that the database seems to contain some entries that are not valid email addresses, right? So let me show you actually the code and the JavaScript code that does that. That is extremely simple. So here I have a function that just retrieves all the emails from the database. A very, very simple SQL statement which just says select email from emails, order by email, and then I'm going to return all of them in an array to the front end, which then will render it. So now, if I wanted to,
so that emails.js is running in the mid tier.
That is running in the mid tier. That is running using Node.js, correct? And I won't show the front end part here because that will just distract.
Okay, got it.
So what I would typically do if I want to filter out email addresses and check if an email address is valid in Node.js or in JavaScript, I would go to npm, right? Because that's where most of the JavaScript and Node modules are. And I know about the module that is called validator. And it does pretty much exactly what I want, right? So what you see here is you see an example that you can require validator, and then validator has a function called isEmail that takes an email address as a string and returns true if it's a valid email address or false otherwise, right? What you can also see on npm is that there are some download statistics. So before I said that JavaScript is a large community, and I think this number that downloads in the last day with 187,000 shows you how big that community is, right?
Pretty popular, yeah.
Yes, I think people seem to trust that module, so I'd like to just use it as well. So what a Node.js developer would typically do is he would just go on his command line and type npm install and the name of the module validator. And I won't execute that now because it will take a few seconds too long for the demo. But what it will do is it will download the module from npm and install it locally in my file system. And that allows it to be ready to use in my application, right? Now, what I can do is I can just do the code snippet that we saw in this example here and type require validator, and then I can say if validator is email of data, only then will I actually push out this email address, right?
Makes sense.
So I can start my little app again, and then I will run it. It looks like I did something. Yeah. So data is probably a row, and I want to take the first one. And then when I rerun it, you will see that all the email addresses are filtered out, the invalid ones. Okay?
Perfect. We're doing all this in the mid-tier.
Yes, so now we're doing this in Node.js in the mid-tier. And wouldn't it be great if I could already filter those email addresses out in my SQL query, right? So what I can do is I can remove that code here, and I want to send this validator package into the Oracle database now. But before I can do that, I actually need to provide the types for the functions that validator provides, such that I can use it from SQL. JavaScript is a dynamically typed language. SQL and PL SQL are statically typed. So before I can use any JavaScript function in the database, I will need to give it the types. Right? Luckily, the community also solved that problem. There's a if you go on validator, you can take on npm, you can take pretty much any popular module and just search for a types package, and you can see that validator has one, and you can also install this one. The types package provides it's like an API. It's an interface implemented in TypeScript, which is a typed superset of JavaScript that provides type declarations for all the functions in the validator. I already installed that as well. And we can actually take a look at it here. So this is the type declaration for the validator package. And you can see that there's an isEmail function here. And it takes the first parameter is a string. The second one is an optional parameter that allows arbitrary options, which we're not using here. And then it says it returns a Boolean, right? So what I can now do is I can hop on my command line, and we've developed a little tool, a little JavaScript command line utility that allows you to send packages, JavaScript packages, into the Oracle database. So the tool is called dbjs. It has a command deploy. I'll specify the connection string, the username Scott, and the password Tiger, and then just the name of the validator package module that I just downloaded. So what I can do is I can just call that. It will take 1 to 2 seconds, and then it will send the validator module, the JavaScript source code, all its dependencies into the Oracle database, and then it will create those function signatures, those PL/SQL function signatures for me. So if I look for isEmail, you can see that it created a function in the PL/SQL package validator that is named isEmail, and it takes a varchar2 as input, and since SQL doesn't have Boolean, it will just return a number here, which is what we typically do in the database, right?
So 0, 1
yes,
kind of thing. Okay.
Exactly. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So now what I can do is I can go back into my emails.js, go in my SQL query and just type where validator is email. I pass it the email column, and I ask if isEmail returns 1, only then will I include the email address in the result of my query. Okay. So that's all I needed to do. Can restart my little Node app here and reload, and you can see the same result, right? So all email addresses have been filtered out.
Very cool. So kind of getting the benefit we typically associate with PL/SQL, we're not shipping that data across the wire, we're saving on that side of things, right?
Yes, exactly. That's what we do in this case. So this might not make perfect sense for this email because the amount of data shipped might not be significant, but there are certainly use cases where you're shipping large amounts of data and you want to avoid that.
So you did dbjs deploy, that ships the JavaScript code into the database. Where does the code go? Is it just written to the file system, or what happens?
The code is stored, at the end is stored in a table, and it's stored the same way that the PL/SQL code is stored in the database. It's a component called KGL.
Got it. Okay. And what happens, so obviously, you know, number maps to number, string maps to varchar2, and then, of course, the Boolean mapped to a number as well. But what about, you know, what if the API in JavaScript, as this one did, right? The second parameter is an options object. How would we handle a scenario like that in the mappings?
Right, so that's an excellent question. So there are various types. So first of all, we have to see if this is a type that is supported in JavaScript or not. And string obviously is. Number is already a tricky case, right? So number might be an arbitrary precision Oracle number. And JavaScript only has the IEEE double, which is a little less precise. So what we did in doing those examples, we default to just convert the Oracle number into a double, and you might lose precision, and you have to be aware of that, which is the same that people already do in the Node driver. But we can also bring in object types, so new JavaScript types for Oracle number. For example, that is already done in JDBC. So you can actually use objects that are an Oracle number, which you can then add, and you keep the precision. The same for date. We can offer a choice between a JavaScript date and a Oracle database date, which has a time zone and is more precise than the JavaScript date.
Gotcha.
Yes. Object types, that the one that you mentioned, the options, those are a little bit more tricky. We don't provide support for those yet. But the natural thing, I think, what you would do in those cases is you would have JSON as a string in your database, and then you can just pass the string or CLOB into your JavaScript function and parse the JSON there.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. So that's the first demo. What else you got for us?
Okay, so what we did here is we actually used a user-defined function, right? We have a JavaScript function that we call from SQL. Now, that is maybe not the typical use case that people use PL SQL for, right? People would much rather write stored procedures in PL SQL that allows them to execute arbitrary SQL inside the database, right?
Right, yeah.
So we can also do that. And what we do is we provide a library here that you can require in your code that is a kind of a SQL driver, much as if in Node.js or in Java you would use the Oracle Node driver or JDBC. You can require a different kind of driver that is available inside the database. And this driver then allows you to execute arbitrary SQL statements. Right, so what I do here is I have a function called analyze that takes two parameters, limit and threshold. And what I'm doing here is I'm querying a tweets table that I have in my database. And I do use the function SQL.execute. I pass it the SQL statement as a string with a bind here, the colon limit. And then the second parameter is an array that just passes through the limit as a parameter. And this is pretty much the same API that the Oracle NodeDB driver provides, right? So that's the same way you pass binds in there. And then there's a third parameter that allows you to specify how you would like the rows to be returned, either as a JavaScript object with name value bindings or as an array with indices. And then what you can do is you can just use the JavaScript for off syntax to iterate over those rows, right? So you would do for tweet of the SQL statement, and for each row in the result of this SQL query, you can do something, right? And what I'm doing here is I'm just extracting the content and the author out of the tweet. And then I'm using another module that I downloaded from NPM, which is called retext. Retext allows us to do natural language processing, and this particular module here, retext sentiment, allows us to do sentiment analysis on strings, which is what I'm doing here on the tweets. Essentially, the way it works, I'm calling this function for each tweet that is extracted from the database. And I parse using the retext processor. I parse the tweet, and then I will just return the polarity, which indicates whether this is a positive tweet or a negative tweet. And then I will only return the tweets that pass a certain polarity threshold, right?
Wow, okay.
So the important part here is those three lines that actually show you that you can execute a SQL statement or query from within your JavaScript.
And so rows there, is that an array of all the rows, or is that an iterable? Is this a synchronous loop? How's that working?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. So in the database, compared to Node.js, we don't have any asynchronous behavior. We don't have an event loop in the database. Everything is synchronous. So the way this works is this will return the SQL execute will return a result which contains a result set, and result set is just an iterable. So it implements the JavaScript ECMAScript iterable contract that allows you to then iterate over it. So it's not an array. It's not materialized. It's lazily evaluated. So as you go through the loop, it will fetch more rows from the database, and you don't have to worry about fetching in badges or anything like that. Because we're in the database, we'll do all of that automatically for you.
Gotcha. Very cool.
So what I can do is I can just deploy that module. So I will use dbjs again, dbjs deploy, the same credentials here, and the module, the JavaScript file that you just saw, tweet.js. So I can deploy that. And it will tell me that there's a function tweet analyze that takes two parameters. The first one is a number, and the second one also is a number. What I forgot to show is that we also created a TypeScript declaration file manually. Since tweet.js is nothing that we downloaded from NPM and nobody provided the TypeScript signature for us, we just wrote it ourselves. So the way this reads is export function analyze with the first parameter being a number and the second one being a threshold, and there's no return value here.
Can you go back to tweet.js real quick?
Mm-hmm.
So I notice at the bottom there's
Mm-hmm.
this module exports analyze. So that's basically when it ships the code over and turns your module into a package, this is how it knows what to go ahead then and expose as a function?
Precisely. So we follow the same approach that the community is doing right now, which is the common JS module exports. So the way this works is you just export the analyze function as an analyze field in the export objects, and then within the database we look at only the functions that are actually exported. All the other ones, like get sentiment polarity, would be private and not available for the database to call.
So in the TypeScript, you only need to define those that you're making public.
Yes.
Exporting. Okay.
Yes, exactly. So let's go back here, and what I can do is I can log into my Docker container, start SQL+. What I will do here is I will just set server output to on, and then I can call tweet analyze, and let's say I want to analyze the first 100 tweets and return only those that have a polarity greater than 3. So I can do that, and it will just here in this example, for the sake of simplicity, print those tweets on the console. So you see the first tweet has a polarity of 5, and retext believe that this is a positive tweet, probably because it has LOL in there. I'm not sure. This one is 4 because it contains fun. So I don't want to argue about the selection here, but it shows you that you can use a very, very powerful analysis functions very, very easily in the database.
That's pretty cool. That looks like a fun NPM package. I'm going to have to check that one out at some point.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Very cool. And folks, I should have said earlier, just if you have questions as we go, feel free to ask, and I'll feed them into Matthias as we go. The first one just came in, actually.
Mm-hmm.
So could this be used for any node module?
That's a very good question. It can be used for pretty much all the modules that are out there that would work in Node or in the browser, right? The community already kind of made sure that they're developing their module in a way that allows them to be portable between frontend and Node.js. And you can use pretty much all of those. Now there's also Node functionality that will not work in the database. Those are built-in modules like accessing the file system, accessing the environment, doing network calls. All of those things are currently not allowed. What we do, however, is we provide so-called shims during the deployment process that pretty much make such required node modules a no-op, such that you can still deploy the package, but if you will use it, you will get an error and say this function is not supported.
Got it.
Yeah, you get a pretty good coverage of what is out there on NPM.
So basically, any module that has some C code, compilation step, that's not going to work.
Oh, that is not going to work either.
So pure JS. Okay.
Yes.
And of course, we knew this question would come at some point. When will this be production ready?
That's also a very good question. So, as I said at the beginning, we are part of Oracle Labs, and our mission is to identify potential technologies that can become a product or go into a product. So, what we need right now is we need feedback from the community on whether they like this. We would like the community to test it. As I said, it's available on OTN for download, and we're looking for feedback whether people believe this is useful. If we get that feedback, then we'll try to push that forward, and I cannot make any promises on when, but the thing is, feedback helps us. So I encourage everybody in the call to download it play with it, give us feedback on what they think, whether this would solve a problem in their company, in what they're currently doing, whether they like the features, whether something is missing. Any feedback
Okay.
helps.
Maybe at the end we can show folks where they would download and how they could provide that feedback.
Yes.
If we have time.
Yes.
Excellent.
Okay.
All right. What's next?
Okay, so this is going to be interesting for some PL SQL folks. We have had different reactions to the next feature. So what you see in the tweet.js is that we are executing SQL in here, right? So we have a literal SQL string, which means that the JavaScript developer would need to know Oracle SQL, right? Now, the community is also building libraries like object relational mappers that are being used in the mid-tier to either, on the one side, not having to actually write SQL manually, which will be generated, but on the other hand, it's also used to provide compatibility between different database systems. And a popular and probably the most popular ORM today is called SQLize. And
in the JavaScript world.
In the JavaScript world, yes, there's clearly Hibernate in Java, which is probably much more popular. Yes. So we also provide support for running SQLize inside the database system. So what you do is you download SQLize from NPM, as we did for Validator, and you require it. Then you need to set up SQLize and tell it that the SQL dialect that we are using is called Oracle MLE. There are other dialects. SQLize will work for on top of the Oracle node driver in your mid-tier, and there's a pull request for that. It works with Postgres, it works with MySQL, it works with SQLite. So you can use SQLize for any kind of database, relational database that is supported. And the way this works is, first, if you have an existing database, you would define your model, which is what we do starting row 8. So we define that there is an emp table that has an emp number, which is an integer, and it's a primary key. It has a name, which is a string. It has a job hire date. It also has a manager, which is a field that we want to refer to as MGR, which is also an integer, and so on, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm providing a declarative specification of how my table looks like. And in line 29, what I'm doing is I'm setting up a foreign key relationship here between an employee and the employee table and the employee's boss. So this really says that an employee has a manager, which is itself is an employee, and that is referred to as boss. Okay. So now what I can do is I can write another function that says find second level, which will filter or give me all the employees whose boss is the CEO. And so the CEO doesn't have a boss here. Okay. And so that's the SQLize way of writing that query, that request. I can do employee find all, include only those whose boss doesn't have a manager. Okay, so that is might be a little unusual to read for somebody who is familiar with SQL, but SQLize has great tutorials on introducing that, and there are many people who like this kind of syntax. Okay. And what I'm doing here is I'm just filtering all of those, and then I'm using, since find all returns a promise, I can then, when the promise is resolved, iterate over the result and get all the employee names and print the employee name and the manager ID. Does that make sense?
It does, yep.
So I already deployed it using db.js, and I can just call the function here. It will be called find second level. And it will do as I said, will return all the second level managers.
Okay, so a couple of questions. First, what is the as boss doing? I'm not familiar with SQLize myself.
Okay, so that is essentially just giving that foreign key relationship a name. that we
Okay.
want to refer as an employee as boss. We would actually not need that, and then we can use that to specify the relationship that we are actually looking in here.
I see. And so you're shipping this along with the model into the database,
Mm-hmm.
which begs the question, it's like the model's already in the database, right? So in theory, we could kind of generate this just based on the data dictionary, right?
That is precisely right. So I guess we just haven't done that yet. It could be a neat exercise to the reader. Anybody could do that. Essentially, what we would want to do is then when we set up Sequelize, we would just query the database catalog and set up this definition here, and then the user doesn't need to do that.
That actually sounds like fun. I'm going to have to take a look at that.
Yeah, you should.
All right, cool. So just recapping briefly here. So the very first demo, you took a module from NPM, you shipped it into the database and showed us that we could use that as a function in the SQL engine.
Yes.
Then in the second one, you took your own custom module, shipped that into the database, and showed us that you could use that as a stored procedure, essentially.
Yes, exactly. So this one is a little, since I'm only using one SQL query here, this might not be the typical use case. You could as well do that as a user-defined function. But imagine that you have a function that implements an entire transaction using dozens of SQL statements that need to be executed sequentially or conditionally. And then this kind of SQL driver comes in very, very handy.
Sure. Personally, I love SQL, but for single row like CRUD type operations, I find it very cumbersome, just spelling that out every time. So the ability to use something like Sequelize for the simple stuff is very appealing to me. And then, of course, when it gets complex, I'm probably less likely to want to have to learn Sequelize's way of doing things. I'd probably just go right to SQL for the tough stuff.
It's really, there are different types of people, different types of people have different preferences. Another advantage which I would like to highlight is that, and I mentioned that briefly, that Sequelize allows you to be a layer that abstracts from the actual database, since not all SQL dialects between databases are compatible. But Sequelize will just deal with that level of compatibility for you. So an application that would run on Postgres, the same Node.js application would run on Oracle. And then with MLE, we also have the option to take a piece of that application that is running in Node and just ship it directly into the database and run it there, right?
Right. Gotcha. We have a couple questions for you. First one, can you show the code that is saved in the database by using the dbjs command?
I believe you can. I think I can turn on some kind of verbose mode. Not sure if it actually shows it.
Could also do
create a catalog.
SQL developer.
Yeah, we don't really support that yet. But there is a verbose flag that allows you to dump the code that is actually shipped into the database. The output here is just a little long. So there is an option. I can follow up on that. And that will show you what we're shipping to the database. And for people who've worked in that space, the dbjs command is actually using browserify under the hood, which is responsible for bundling all of the third, fourth, fifth party dependencies of validator into a single file, into a single JavaScript module.
That's actually a question that I meant to ask you earlier. So validator included, but also the second demo you did, where you had all these other dependencies. So I guess dbjs is traversing the dependency tree and then shipping everything over as a single unit.
Yeah, exactly. dbjs doesn't do much. It just uses browserify that actually does that. So what browserify will do is it will go over all the requires, resolve them, and literally put the text into the same unit, into the same file. And that gives us a very nice way. And that's how people work in the browser, right? Whoever is familiar with front-end development, people there typically write their application in Node.js, and then they compile it into something that can then be used in the script tag in HTML. And people are using Browserify or Webpack for that as well. So we are really following the same approach that the JavaScript community is already using.
Makes sense. And so for the person that asked that question about seeing the code, that's your homework now, right? At the end, we'll show you where you can find the VM or the Docker
exactly.
file, and then you can take a look at that yourself. But I imagine, Matthias, that it's essentially kind of like a PL SQL wrapper that makes calls similar to if you were doing a wrapper on Java, right? There's some kind of internal call spec there to call the.
That is precisely right. So if DBJS actually does two things. First, it bundles up the JavaScript you just said and sends this to the database, which stores the literal JavaScript text ready to be executed. And then it takes the TypeScript declaration files that we've been using, and for each of the exported functions, it transpiles or compiles those into a corresponding PL SQL function signature. So what is actually happening under the hood is that for each function in the TypeScript file, we generate a external PL SQL call specification that reads create or replace function, validator, and then it says as language.js, which is the same as you would do with Java or C that are running using Xproc.
Gotcha.
C is running using Xproc.
All right.
So it's really nothing new here. We are just reusing the existing very powerful PL SQL concepts. And with DBJS, our goal is to make that appeal to a JavaScript developer that doesn't use or doesn't know PL SQL and maybe just wants to get into it incrementally.
Oh, yeah. I would not want to write those wrappers myself, so thanks for DBJS.
And there are many of them, right, if you just look at Validator.
So the next question is, what text editor are you using?
That's a text editor developed by our friends at Microsoft. It's called Visual Studio Code, which is a great editor for developing JavaScript, but also TypeScript.
Gotcha.
And I think this is important to mention here, right? I mentioned at the beginning that with JavaScript there comes a huge community and many people are using that. And I believe the tooling is something else that we really want to open up with this. We want people to be able to use the editor of their choice to develop JavaScript, right? And there are many great editors, and with this approach you can really pick the editor with the syntax highlighting and the linting that you want.
So with PL SQL, we just have a few options out there. A really good and probably very common one is SQL Developer. That's what I personally use.
Yes.
There's a few others if you want to pay for them, but you're right, in the JavaScript world, there's just a lot more out there. So it'd be nice to use those.
And this is something else that we would really like to get feedback on, whether if people would like to use that, whether they would like to be able to write JavaScript in SQL Developer, or whether they would rather prefer to have the editor of their choice.
Okay. Cool. Do you have any more demos for us?
I do have another demo that shows a different angle on this. So with Validator, we saw that we were using a function in the where clause, which is a so-called scalar user-defined function. What it does is it takes one column, one value, and returns one value, right? But the Oracle database also has other extension points that allow you to provide other kinds of functions, like aggregation functions or table functions. And what I want to show here is I want to show a way that allows you to write a user-defined aggregation function in JavaScript and then show you how you can use it from SQL. So the database obviously provides many very powerful and efficient aggregation functions already. One of them is probably maximum, that allows you to figure out the maximum in a group, for example. But it doesn't provide a function, as far as I know, that allows you to retrieve the second highest value. right? So what we did is we just implemented such a function in JavaScript. It has a constructor here that defines a couple of members, max, second max, and the count. And then what we do is we provide two functions, iterate and terminate. And you would provide the same functions you can provide if you are implementing user-defined aggregation functions in PL/SQL, and they're named the same, I believe. So iterate just takes a value, and what it does here is just keeps the maximum and also looks for the second highest value, and then also keeps a count to distinguish the first and the second case. So the details of this implementation are not very important. But what you can see is that the iterate function will be called for every row stored in a table or in a group, contained in a group, and it will compute those values. And then terminate is called at the very end to just return the result here. Okay. So what I can do is I can use dbjs again. Let me clear the screen. So I will use dbjs deploy the usual, and then I pass a -f option here, which is stands for free. So far our packages have been deployed as PL/SQL packages, like there was validator.isEmail. Aggregation functions are not supported to be part as PL/SQL packages, which is why I need to pass the F option here. And I can do that. Deploy it into the database again. And what we will see is that we will get an aggregation function called secondMax, takes a number and returns a number. Now going back to SQL+, I can just use that as an aggregation function. So what I will do is I will call select secondMax salary from employee, and it will just return that one value, which is the second highest value in my table.
That's pretty darn cool. Going back to the code there on line 29, I think you skipped over that part. So here you're using this aggregation library that you've imported in at the top to actually create what then needs to be exported, right?
Yes, very, very good catch. We were discussing this quite a bit, and this is the easiest way that we came up with. You could also just it allows us to be a little more flexible under the hood, and people could actually implement their own mapping from PL/SQL iterate function to a function like they would like to call it, for example, or different kind of contracts. And that aggregate is a module that we provide, yes.
The function there is returning an instance of secondMax. Mm-hmm. Do you need the function wrapper there, or could I just say, create and then pass in new secondMax?
It's a good question. Not sure why we're doing that.
Okay. And I also noticed you're using sort of the classical style of prototypal inheritance with prototype dot. Mm-hmm. Could we use the new class syntax? And I guess where I'm going with that is, what version of JavaScript are you supporting?
Yes, absolutely. You can use a class as well. We're, I believe, supporting the latest ECMAScript 2016 as of this point.
Okay, excellent. One question came in. What is running inside the database? It's a little vague, I think, but pretty much anything you've seen where he's typing dbjs deploy, it's basically bundling up the code that you're seeing as well as dependencies that code has, and shipping all of that into the database and then running it there.
Maybe the question is concerned with what JavaScript engine we are running inside the database system.
Okay, sure.
So I'm just going to answer that, assuming that was the question. So within Oracle and Oracle Labs, we're developing our own framework that allows you to implement new kinds of programming languages. I won't go into the details, but the project is called GraalVM, which is, as I said, a framework that allows you to implement programming languages. And we have implementations of JavaScript, Ruby, Python, R, and even Java itself written in that framework. using that GraalVM. And that's what we are embedding into the Oracle database. So
Got it.
GraalVM is open. You can just look it up on GitHub, and that's what we're running inside the database.
Okay. So the next question kind of clarifies it. An interpreter inside the JVM, some other interpreter that needs to be loaded, managed, like the built-in JVM?
Yes. So we are not running this on a Java virtual machine. So GraalVM is a VM and a compiler and language implementation that allows us to run those languages on the JVM. So you can even run them on your pure stock hotspot JVM. But we also have a project that ahead of time compiles all of the code, all of the language into a shared library with its own garbage collector and its own code cache, its own virtual machine infrastructure, and we are loading this inside the database. So this is gives us an opportunity to have a new virtual machine, a very modern virtual machine running inside the database system.
Gotcha. Next question says lead and lag. I guess it's along the lines of, so we see an aggregation function here. Can we also do analytic functions in JavaScript?
Excellent question. I mean, aggregation is kind of an analytical approach, right? It allows you to do some kind of analytics. We also provide table functions that can take n input values and return m number of output values. This allows you to write more powerful things. Now, JavaScript typically is not used as much for analytics as, for example, Python on R are. There are certainly analytic libraries and people are doing that, but it's not the most prominent way to use JavaScript. There are, however, approaches and libraries like num.js, which corresponds to NumPy and Python, that are available on NPM, and you can actually use them inside the database as well. What will happen is then if this num.js library would take an array, your query result would first need to be materialized at this point into an array and can be used by the function then. But for Python, we are really shooting for the analytics use case compared to the OLTP transactional kind of use case. And we want to allow you to use packages such as NumPy and Pandas from the Python world inside the database, running there very, very efficiently.
That makes sense. I've actually never, I think we have the ability, I've never used it, but within PL SQL to define aggregation functions as well, right? This is just another API to the same kind of thing.
This is just another API, yes.
And so as I understand it, you have scalar functions, aggregation functions, and analytic functions, and I guess the internal API I've never seen, right? So you have iterate and terminate here. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what would really change with an analytic function, but as I understand it, what's unique about analytic functions is that they actually work not on the rows themselves in the table, but then just in the result set. So they're far more efficient. They're like a, just a more efficient type of function. But I don't know if
there are also other properties for the aggregation functions, and there are two other functions that I didn't show you here that you can implement. One is called merge, I believe, and the other one delete. And merge you would typically implement if you want your aggregation function to be run in parallel. So you can compute various aggregates independently and then combine them later on, in which case the database would call merge for you. There's also the delete function, which I think you need to implement it when you're using windowing functionality, when you're using your aggregation for windowing functions. And in this case, you need to be able to remove the last value from your window, and that's what the delete function is doing. So yeah, the Oracle database allows you to do very, very powerful and efficient aggregations, and we support that here as well.
Very nice. Let's see, did you want to show any more demos?
No, but there's something that I would like to highlight, which maybe is obvious, maybe it's not. So what we did here in this tweet example, we implemented the code, the logic in JavaScript, and then had a separate file, a TypeScript file, in which we exported the analyze function, right? Now, TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript, and the way TypeScript works is it's actually never executed, but what TypeScript compiler does is it compiles it down into plain JavaScript. So what we could have done here is we could have just implemented this entire functionality in TypeScript itself, and this would give us the typical advantages of static typing, that we have better UI support, better static typing that can give us errors earlier. And if people prefer to write TypeScript, they could do that as well, and DBJS will just do the transpilation to JavaScript for you. So DBJS also supports TypeScript.
Gotcha. TypeScript. All right. Can you show folks where to find the VM if they're interested in taking it for a spin?
Yes. So, on the Oracle Technology Network, you can find under database a section called Multilingual Engine, and this contains the download of, as I mentioned at the beginning, of a version as VirtualBox image and a tar file for Docker, which you can then Docker import into your local Docker installation.
Oh, I didn't see that one before. Is that new, the Docker?
That is relatively new, yes. So we didn't manage to put it onto the Docker hub yet, which is why you cannot just do Docker pull, but you can do Docker import and then provide this tar.gz file, and that will work just as well.
Got it.
We also have, yeah, sorry.
No, that was my next question. How can folks provide feedback?
Yes, so we set up an oral community within within OTN. You can get to the community through the OTN page, and there we have a forum that you can just engage with us, engage with the community, have discussions, and we also have a feedback form which you can reach from here, which is a short survey that we would like you to complete if you use the extension that has questions like, what did you like about it? What features are you missing? Did you run into any problems? And any kind of feedback would really help us in order to push this extension further, potentially into a product.
All right. Well, I think that's it. Did you want to say anything else?
No, that's it.
All right, great. Well, then, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. I don't see any more questions in the queue. Also, thanks again, Matthias, for taking the time to show us around MLE.
Appreciate it.
Very cool stuff. Go on.
There were some very good questions.
Yeah. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we see this in a production release in the near future.
Yes, that's what I hope.
All right.
All right.
Thanks again, everybody.
Dan.
Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you both so much for being with us, and thank you all for attending.
Bye.
Bye-bye.